Well, the new project car is here, and you guys know what that means. It's time to get tuning. Stick around. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the garage. And yes, as you can see, we have bought a 1993 GMC Typhoon. Number 39 for you guys that are in the know that like to keep track of numbers. There's about 4,600 of these ever produced between 92 and 93. This is the 93. This is a white on white, as you can tell, and we've got a whole list of stuff to get done to this. We're not really going to get into any of the details. This is just a Typhoon. It's all-wheel drive, 4.3 liter V6 turbocharged from the factory. At the time that this came out, it was one of the quickest vehicles on the road, and in fact was the original sports SUV, and I'm absolutely in love with it. I went down to Georgia, picked this thing up, drove it back, had a couple small issues that we got sorted out whenever we got home. Mainly just had to replace a lot of the vacuum lines. Cruise control ended up going out, which was tied back to a vacuum leak, and the thing was going into overboost because the wastegate wasn't working correctly, once again tied to a vacuum issue. Put the new vacuum hoses on there that Sports Machine makes, and you'll hear me talk about those guys a lot because they're one of the only people that still make parts for these things, even though the little 4.3 in this is basically a small box Chevy with 2 cylinders removed out of it. It even has the same kind of runner, intake runner design where there's 2 close together, then where there would be 2 close together on the back. On the driver's side, there's only 1. And so the front cover, you know, a lot of the different parts are small block Chevy parts on here, but then of course everything else is pretty much unique to the Cyclones and the Typhoons, which makes them very rare. And this one's totally bone stock. I should probably leave it alone, but hey, that's not what this channel does. This is what we're going to take to Rocky Mountain Race Week this year instead of the Nova. And so we've got a lot of performance mods to throw on this thing: bigger turbos, injectors, E85, you know, just a litany. Cam, I'm going to try and get some heads for it if I can. It's a little bit of a wishy-washy thing without spending a bunch of money. I've got wheels on order already. I don't know if you can see over here, but I've got 4 275 drag radials to go on all 4 corners of this thing. I've got the guys over at Performabuilt putting a transmission together that we'll be throwing in here very soon, and we'll talk about tuning with a standalone transmission controller whenever we get that put in, because we're getting a 4L60E that's built to be good for up to 700 horsepower at the wheels with a 3,000 RPM stall. So that will be something else that we feature. But right now we're going to get into ECU tuning. Now, these things came out early 90s. They are a chip prom setup. There are software and hardware out there to do that. We're going to skip right past chip tuning. Not ideal for our situation. But what we are going to do is use this platform to showcase a lot of different standalone setups, and we're starting with one in particular. This is the MotoCam 360 Stage 1. It is essentially just a Megasquirt 3, which is the reason I got excited about it, because it has a factory connection for the harness. This thing is literally plug and play. Take the factory ECU out, plug this one in, and you're good to go. There's a couple things that we are going to have to change out in order to get this thing running. One of them is we're going from a 2-bar to a 3-bar map sensor, because we will be exceeding 15 PSI on this setup. And then the other one is this has support for a wideband, obviously, because it can self-learn. We will have to depin the factory connector for the narrow band and pin in a wideband. We'll be using our standard AEM 30-0300 that we use on about everything. This being a stage 1, it's still going to do bank-to-bank fueling. It's still going to be a distributor for the ignition. There is a stage 2 and a stage 3 that will end up going to the stage 3 on this, which has full sequential fuel control and coil near plug ignition control. We will have to go ahead and put a cam sync distributor in at that point in time and a reluctor wheel on the crank. So waiting on all those parts, but for now we're just going to focus on getting the stage 1 set up, installed, and get this thing ready to start programming. Nice thing about it is this comes with a default tune loaded up that should get a stock vehicle up and running on. After that, I've got some snake eater performance injectors we can throw in. This thing will support an E85 sensor, so we can go ahead and run ethanol on the stock system if we wanted to, things like that. So I've got the stock ECU pulled out. This one will plug right in, but before we do that, I need to depin a couple of the pins for the wideband to plug in using the factory connectors. I went on our buddies over at customconnector.com. You've heard me talk about them in the past. I ordered the pins that work with these connectors. That way I can just take the pins and plug them right in. So we're going to do that now, and then we'll get to setting this thing up. Okay, after literal hours to get the factory O2 sensor out and the wideband in, and by hours I mean it took an hour and 59 minutes to get the old one out and 1 minute to get the new one in. I had to use every trick in the book, man. I had to hose it with WD-40, hit it with an air chisel to get that stuff vibrated in there good, hit it with heat, hammer on a smaller socket. It was just welded on. But now we're going to get into throwing our connector in, and in this case it's E14 for this particular setup. Will only apply to you Typhoon and Cyclone guys. But, you know, as I said, the cool thing about dealing with Megasquirts is if you do enough digging out there, you're going to find somebody that's probably done a custom setup with it that you can just buy because it's open source. The hardware, the software, all that stuff is open source, and that's why it's one of my favorite standalones. You know, it's just super cool that people take the time, much like Tim, the guy that's doing this one that I've got. There's only, you know what, 6,000 total between the Cyclones and Typhoons, and you know, there's plenty of people out there going over and doing other standalone setups, but the idea of being able to do one that plugs directly in instead of having to do a chip tune, that's what I'm all about. So I want to try and get this pin out. Hopefully I got the right pins to replace it with our new wideband, and it should be this purple one. I don't know if there's any markings on this. E14. And using my depinning batch of cheap depinners. See if we can pop this thing out. Come on, baby. Let go. Oh, felt it for a second. Let me look at the one that I put on our new harness so I can get a better idea how the lock may work. Okay. Should just be a straight push back until it hits the stop, and it should pull out. I may need to use a bigger pin though. There it is. Okay, that is the right pins. And conversely, whenever you're dealing with a connector like this, you normally put your D-pin tool in the smaller hole. This smaller hole is actually the one that interfaces on this. The bigger hole is the one that holds the lock. So now we can take our updated pin, which I'm gonna be able to see unless I get up there and kind of hold it. Sorry, you guys know the shakes are always gonna get you. Come on, focus. But there is our analog signal pinned on our analog output, and then our ground and our analog ground are both going over to a D-ring that we're going to land on the ECU in the hopes that we don't get any analog drift. And if you guys have watched any of my videos talking about wideband sensors, you know exactly what I'm talking about and why I don't like analog input signals, because they drift. So we'll install this right here. There we go. We've got our factory one. I'll go ahead and tape it to the harness to get it out of the way. We've got our wideband connector coming from the sensor, ran through a grommet in the firewall. And then we need to run our power over to our fuse box. And the cool thing about these early 90s vehicles, they've got the older style fuse box where you can get actual jumpers that click into the fuse box, and the fuse box will be labeled with like accessory, ignition, and all the different kind of voltages, and it literally just plugs in there and you're good to go. You just butt splice this up to that and rock and roll. So I'm going to go do that, grab the gauge. I think we're just going to mount it in the glove box for now until we get our gauge mounts in. And in hindsight, I should have left my wires a little bit longer because they're not going to reach all the way over to the gate, the A-pillar now. Oh well, we can always extend them. And then we can tie in our new Megasquirt ECU, get connected to it, get downloaded, and start tuning this thing. This may be one of the quickest, I will say this is the quickest standalone install I've ever done. Usually it's just days upon days upon days of fighting harnesses and stuff like that. And it's nice whenever you can get a solution that's just plug and play. Just 1, 2, 3, thank you, let's go. Let's get to tuning. You know the drill, ABT. I'll be right back. Okay, so I've got our ECU in the bracket with the little mount buttons on the back side. This is our serial cable, and we're actually going to be utilizing a Wi-Fi dongle that plugs into the serial cable. Allows us to do all of our data logging and tuning over Wi-Fi instead of having to connect up to a serial adapter. So the big thing that we're going to need to do here is get up in here, get this thing kind of situated. The speed control module goes back on there in the process, so we'll have to do that too. And try and keep some of these wires routed a little bit better. Let's go ahead and get this one back down because it's in the way. Okay, we're in the truck now, and I should have the computer up where you can see it. Hopefully you can see everything. I've got the wideband in the glove box along with our wireless adapter for right now. Hopefully this other camera's capturing all that. I know it's dark in here right now, but the big thing about it is I did have to move the ground. The ground originally for the wideband wasn't working. I just put it on a different ground and everything fired up. You're gonna probably need a serial to USB adapter to get connected up to it initially if you're using something like this Wi-Fi thing. And the reasoning behind that is that we've got to go into the communications and change the settings on this stuff over to our TCP IP. And then this unit doesn't use the default IP address. It's actually printed on the back of it. This is the perfect tuning unit. So I already did this on a different laptop, but I haven't done it on this laptop that I'm going to be using. So I'm going to go ahead and type this in 192.168. Was that 4.1? And then the port on this is 8080. Whenever you first set up TunerStudio, you're not going to be able to access the communication stuff, and that's why using a serial bus helps, because you've got to get a tuner configuration out of, or create a tuner configuration before you can change those settings. You can create just kind of a blank tuner configuration if you need to get to the comm settings at first, but that should give us the ability to go ahead and key on here, and then we'll jump on the Wi-Fi network. We should see it pop up in a couple seconds. There it is, perfect tuning, and the default password. And we should connect up. Once it's connected up, we should see our TunerStudio. There it goes. TunerStudio is now online. We're good to go. There's a couple things. This is the default one that comes in this particular ECU. A lot of times you're not going to have a default configuration that's set up for the ECU that you're in, and so you're going to have to go in and set up a lot of the different engine settings and things like that. We'll talk about that at a later date, but for now we're kind of focusing on the main things that we need to do here, and that's going to be underneath tools. We need to do our calibrate the map barrow, because we've got a GM3 bar in here, and we're going to double check at 0 volts. We have 1.1, and I've got the Racetronics data pulled up over here. 0 volts, we're actually at 3.6 because it's a little bit different, 3.6. And then what we will then do is come over and look at our 5 volts. 5 volts is 315. And there we go, we can go 315, and we'll burn that into the ECU. Now you can see that we're right at 100 kPa on our gauges, which is perfect. That's atmospheric, so we're good to go there. Next, we're going to have to set up our wideband, and that's going to be, where is the wideband stuff at? Calibrate AFR table. And you can see there's a bunch of drop downs in here. In fact, there's AEM stuff in here. These AEMs are not correct. And that reminds me, I want to kick this thing over to, oh, it's on Lambda. Okay, good. We're on Lambda already. And so we'll be using a custom linear wideband, 1 volt. If we come over to our guide here, we can see at 1 volt is 0.66 lambda. We'll do the same thing, 0.66. Actually, this is asking for AFR. I have set up all of my tables in Lambda, but since this is in AFR, we still need to do it in AFR because it's just going to take our reading and divide it by 14.7. So we'll go 9.69 instead. And you'll see what I'm talking about on the tables here in a bit, because the tables are actually going to be reading in lambda, but the math on the Megasquirt is just taking our reading and then dividing it by 14.7 to get lambda. So it works kind of out the same way. And we're looking at 4 volts is going to be 16.81. So we can do 16.81, and we'll go ahead and write that to controller. Okay, we're good to go. And we're at full lean right now. I'm going to open up the garage door and we're going to fire this thing up and see how those are reading. And right away, we're falling in right around 14.7. And you can see we're reading right at 1 lambda. So our gauges look good. Let me back out so I don't smog out the garage here with fumes. My wife gets mad when I do that. Get this thing outside into the air and we'll take a look at a couple other small things. If you haven't been able to tell, this is the next day. I don't know if I prefaced that, but we're looking really good on all this stuff as far as that goes. I'm happy with our readings. It's close enough on. We can take our gauge here and let's go into designer mode, and this is where it gets complicated, where we go in here and we try to edit our gauges out. And let's find our EFO corrections, inputs. There we go. Okay. So now our gauge is reading in lambda. We can exit designer mode. And what we want to do now, we can see that we're kind of hunting. We're not in closed loop, so let's go ahead and click out of this. Let's go over to the Tune for You table. And this is where we're looking at our base VE table. We can start an auto tune. We'll go in, check our advanced settings. This might be a little bit high. This is how much it can change. If we're idling at a 38 VE, that could go up to 50, so it could go up to 88. So we're going to drop this down to about 15. And then our cell percentage change is going to be our speed, how fast that we're making corrections. We want to go ahead and kind of dummy that down. So let's put that at 15 to begin also. The rest of it, minimum RPMs, we're good at 500. Minimum coolant, I'm going to drop this down a little bit because this has got a 160 thermostat in it. So I'm going to put it down to 120 for now, seeing that we only have to be on there. And then we can look at our AFR target tables, which is going to be based off this Lambda table 1. And the only thing that I don't necessarily agree with is through this section having a lean burn. Let's put this, in fact, I'm going to change all this section down here to 1, not 10. There we go. And let's burn that in. Our new target is going to be 10 for idle, or 1.0 for idle, 1 lambda. And we're going to start the auto tune and see what it does. And she died right away. Okay. Might have to narrow our corrections down some more. We'll give it a second to come back online. And let's do a 5 value change. Let's do 2% at a time. Okay, there we go. So now it's correcting our table. Getting a little aggressive. Okay, so our updates are a little bit aggressive, and they might be a little bit too aggressive for underneath idle, and that can be pretty typical. So we're going to go ahead and bump this back up to 30. We'll apply it, make sure that it likes it, save it on ECU. And we might have to go out there and update our auto tune to say not to auto tune below 1,000. And we may just have to manually tune to keep this thing from hunting. Because we're going lean. It's almost like it's dipping down into these cells here. That almost acts like a timing issue on our ignition settings for our idle. So we can check our idle control, see if we need to dummy down. We got step revive. Oh, you know, one thing that we have not done is set our TPS, and it may not be happy about that. That should be one thing that you do first every time. So let's go in, we'll get connected up here. Calibrate TPS. Okay, now we're going to go wide open throttle. Okay. We'll go ahead and power cycle that. And we'll go ahead and save our tune since we've updated the TPS. And it's telling me it's corrupt, so let's save it as a new tune file. And my screen recorder just shut down on me in the middle of this tuning, so we're still fighting some idle issues, and without going out and data logging and taking a look at things like our TPS sensor and our timing to see what those are doing, we really don't have anywhere to go quite yet. That's going to be kind of the next step. We've gone through the installation, the kind of the initial starting, setting up things like our map sensor and our wideband sensor, some of those basic things. So we're going to go ahead and end this video because it's already getting too long as it is. You know, we're probably looking at 20 plus minutes, and you know I don't like to get too much content into one category. So we will come back and dive further into this, talk about fuel tuning, talk about timing tuning, talk about idle tuning, power enrichment tuning, boost tuning, all that fun stuff. You guys know the drill. Thanks for stopping by the garage, and remember, ABT, always be tuning.